Welcome back to Vital Signs. I'm here with Jeery Fu. We have talked about all kinds of topics today, so if you're just tuning in, you're going to want to go to nowmedia.tv, click on shows, and catch the full episode, because we've gone into detail about weight loss drugs. We've talked about supplementation and detox. We've talked about what's happening in the pharmaceutical industry and how can we take care of our greatest asset, our health. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about burnout and some of the things that we can do when we feel like we just have too much on our plate. And now we're going to dive into the topic that I've been waiting to dive into with Jeery, because this is something he is a very well versed in, and that's conflict resolution. Most human beings avoid conflict, most people. So if you're thinking, oh, I feel seen, yes, most people avoid conflict because it's uncomfortable. We don't like to feel uncomfortable. So Jeery, talk to me a little bit about the biggest misconceptions about conflict resolution.
Yeah, a big challenge for a lot of people is the identifying and clarifying the story that they tell themselves when conflict arises. Because a lot of times, I know in my own life, when I still struggle with this, guys, it's easy to fall back into bad habits, but a lot of times conflict, when people tell themselves, I'm a bad person because this person is upset with me, or like I did something wrong and therefore I have to beat myself up, or somehow I'm lesser than because that some conflict has arisen. And that's not necessarily accurate, because you might have not even foreseen what kind of conflict came about, and sometimes you have to clean up other people's messes. And so we, in terms of conflict, part of this is recognizing, instead shifting people to realize, hey, what is the opportunity to learn, and how can I help solve this problem? And if that involves me, adjusting some habits or changing some, doing something on my part to reduce the next recurring conflict, then yeah, let me do that. And so part of this is recognizing, okay, other things around that conflict also, to say, okay, well, Jeery, I don't have courage. And I say, well, can you use curiosity instead? And so when you realize also conflict is about listening and making people feel heard and appreciated and respected, even if you disagree with them, the more likely you're able to diffuse the situation and actually lead to productive action. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it feels exhausting. You say, oh, not this conversation again. But again, conflict, one of my favorite sayings that came up in the previous conversation around this was that conflict is a truth revealer. It's very hard to be angry. It's like angry and dishonest at the same time, unless someone's just like that compulsive a liar where they know how to create a ruse and just get you off balance. But the idea is that conflict shows that, hey, you know what? At some point, some expectations were broken. And the fact that they were honest enough to bring this to your attention means that they care. And if that means that they care, then that means there's something to build on in terms of at least trying to reach some healthier spot in that relationship.
I really want to highlight what you said, because it is so true. And it goes back to our previous conversation about boundaries too. Yes. It's about, we societally, we want to be people pleasers. And so when we're not pleasing people, or people are unhappy, then we make it about us. And really, folks, it's not about us. We are all, there's two sides to every story. Well, really, there's three sides. There's your side, my side, and then the actual thing that happened, the objective third observer. But the reality is, when we're people pleasers, we have a hard time understanding that it's not solely our responsibility to do all the things, and what we're doing when we do that is we're disallowing the other perspective. And so you said 2 ears, listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and conflict resolution is about listening. And so that's the same thing with boundaries, right? If you were to ask me to dinner tonight, I would say, you know what, Jeery, I really appreciate that you want to go to dinner. I wish that I could go with you. Unfortunately, I already have plans.
Yes.
Like, I'm listening, I'm validating your request, and I'm setting the boundary. And the same happens in conflict resolution. Give us a practical strategy that we could use to approach these difficult conversations. Maybe there's an unresolved conflict in let's use a life conflict. Like, there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of challenges that happen, for example, in marriage, or like, that's a great one. Business partnership is another one, right? But you have an ongoing thing that you haven't brought up, and it's escalating in your own mind. How do we start that conversation?
Yeah, let me give you a very personal and exhausting example from my own journey in getting better at conflict. Is that at one point I had to evict a roommate that had defaulted on his lease, and that was extremely intense, and it was exhausting, because he and I both knew the exact day where he did not pay, and therefore it was up to him to leave, and that was hard because he would just sit in his room and just wait for me to actually enforce the legal consequences of defaulting on this lease. And so me trying to go to his room and knock on his door, and I'm just sitting there just with this knot in my chest, just wondering what's he going to say and what's he going to do. And of course, all he did was just give me promises that had no real merit. And then after a while, I could feel this resentment building up to say, I want to trust this guy. I want to believe he's going to come through for me. And yet at the same time, his actions and evidence were contrary to the hope that I had in him. And so at some point, people had to affirm me and challenge me and say, hey, Jeery, you are the landlord. You have legal precedent. He signed the lease. He knows what consequences are befallen to him. And until you actually follow through with the necessary and difficult, are you willing to live with the consequences if you don't? And that was a big wake-up call for me. Because I realized I couldn't even look forward to coming home, Jen, knowing that he was squatting property. And so I tried to, again, I typed out a letter, because you try to inch your way forward to say, okay, well, I don't want to knock on his door. I'm just going to put this to make sure we can't ignore it, and I need to have this. And then, of course, he's begging some more, and then you try to, kick the can down the road, and it's just, and so the definitive action is, okay, what's a successful conversation? And I said, okay, well, the successful conversation is he needs to go and he give me a deadline. Okay, well, now that I have an idea of, the target, okay, how can I drum up 10 seconds of courage, the second step? How can I drum up 10 seconds of courage to put this on? Well, I'm afraid to knock on his door. Okay, let me type out the letter. I'm going to tape it. Taping it, like you never think, you never had so much trouble taping a letter to a door. And so I taped the letter to the door. Okay, next step, script my critical phrases where I'm saying, okay, well, if this conversation starts to go in directions that I hope that it wouldn't, how am I ready to counter his counter? And he would say things like, oh, just give me another week. And I said, well, I gave you a week and you still haven't had anything. If he says, well, no, I'm still trying. And I said, well, okay, tell me, make him get specific about how many leads have you actually found in terms of rental assistance. And if he has nothing to show, then I can say, well, no, you clearly aren't taking this seriously. The fourth step, some people may shift these out of, in a different order, shuffle them however they need to. But the fourth is to rehearse this, right? So because if I don't take the time to iron out my words previously, I'm going to trip over them in the moment. So let me make sure I got my phrasing down. And then step 5 is to follow through. And this is where it's different for a lot of people in healthcare or any other situation where, they realize, oh, well, if I say, hey, you need to leave, and he says, make me, and am I done? I'm like, no, I am not done. Failure doesn't mean you're done. Failure means you're not done, because until he left the property, when I told him, hey, it doesn't matter how many more deadlines they give you, if you actually get rental assistance, you need to use it to cover rent at your next place because you're done here. And only then did I see him start to pack up his things. Because when he realized, oh, I can't just promise Jeery that I'm eventually going to get the money, he realized that was checkmate for him, and then he finally started to move out.
So I just want to kind of recap very briefly, it's about having a plan. Like Jeery had a plan. He scripted out what he was going to do. He figured out what he wanted. He broke it down into the steps, and then he drummed up the courage, and you just move through the plan. So just like with everything else, if we don't want to bring up a conversation, folks, I've had these hard conversations. I have literally written it down and given it to the person, and then I had a copy so that when it came to me, I still had my bullet points so that I didn't forget anything, because it's important that you feel heard and validated. So it's important that we resolve conflict. Unresolved conflict results in other stress and health issues. Jeery, how can people reach out to you if they'd like to learn more?
Yeah, so if any of those 5 steps resonated with you, I actually give away that guide for free on my website. So my personal coaching website is adaptingleaders.com/guide. And again, adaptingleaders.com/guide, and you can get that guide for free. Yep, there it is on the screen. Wonderful. Yep. If you want to gain clarity and confidence and closure, if you want to become a more visible, valuable, and vocal leader, feel free to get a complimentary 30-minute consultation. You can book right on that website.
Fantastic. And Jeery, for the people who are at home and they've listened to this, they've been through this entire journey with us. We've talked about a whole lot. We've talked about our health habits. We've talked about what's happening with pharmaceuticals and not readjusting our dosages and things without checking with our practitioners. We've talked about boundaries and burnout. what is one action step that everybody at home can take today that will move them positively forward?
Yeah, I think what I would do, the simplest thing is I would just take out your phone, like turn on your voice recorder, and then I would just say, what am I feeling now? You know, what do I want out of life? And what is one thing I want to do now? And who is one person that can help me do that thing? And I'd be curious to see if people want to share that, you know, and see what kind of thoughts come up. I'd love to see what happens next.
Fantastic. I love it. A little bit of self-exploration for you today. We have talked about a lot of things today. We are always focused on your greatest asset, your health, and that's your holistic health and well-being, so that you can be a peak performing human being and really escalate and elevate where you are. Because we only have one body. We only have one body. It is our greatest asset, and we want to take care of it. I'm going to give you an action step today, and that's think about all of the lifestyle choices that you make. And if you are not in that health that you want, the physical health, the mental, social, emotional health that you want to be, think about one thing that you are willing to start doing, and pick up that book, Atomic Habits. Jeery mentioned it earlier. It's an excellent resource. And make that the first habit that you implement. It's a great way to start. And what happens is when we do that one thing every day, like for me, lately it was going to bed a little bit earlier because I wasn't getting the sleep that I need. And so it's hard because I want to do other things or I get caught up. But that became my habit. And then once that's just easy, then you know you're ready for the next one. And I want you to take that action today because it's the one step that you take today that's going to add up to your residual success over time. Let's take advantage of compounding interest of our health and really maximize our greatest asset. Unfortunately, all good things come to an end, including this show. But the good news is we'll be here same time, same station next week. Until then, have an amazing rest of your day.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.